Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And if you like the way I do these episodes, you might like to look into my expansive coaching offering or my freedom of spirit work, which you can find out about on beingspace.world. So today I'm going to talk about something that I call over-revving. And I came up with this term. I was looking into a situation that was occurring for me at the time, which was of getting kind of overly exhausted, overwhelmed, not burnt out, just kind of overtired. And I was chatting with a friend and exploring it with her. She said, you went into your second wind. And what she meant by that was that I'd been working away. I'd reached a point where I was tired, and instead of stopping and resting and regrouping and recuperating, I went into my second wind, which is a term, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but over here in the UK, it's a term which means where you dig deeper and you pull up another reserve of energy to draw from. Now, the thing about going into your second wind, it's probably actually a survival technique, because what it allows you to do is, if you're running away from the tiger, or if you're in a desperate situation and you just need to keep going, it means that you can go beyond the point that you would normally stop. You can go beyond the point where you're actually tired and pull another piece of energy in and use that to keep going. Now, this is actually originally designed to be used in emergency situations, not to be used as a lifestyle. But unfortunately, a lot of us have got into the habit of using it as a lifestyle. Why would we do that? Well, partly because when you go into your second wind, you can actually get maybe 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% more productivity achieved in the same period of time, or within the same 24-hour period, because you're actually resting for less of it. You're not relaxing, hanging out with your family, going for a walk, dancing, sleeping, cooking, having fun, whatever else you might be doing, which would actually help you to restore yourself, ready for the next day. And also because we're in such a progress-oriented and outcome-oriented culture, that we think that more productivity, more performance is better than less. The problem with it is, well, there are several problems with it, but one of the problems with it is that the second wind is we're actually digging into our energy reserves. And our energy reserves are there for a reason. It's a bit like in the old days, in the car, there used to be a reserve tank, whereby you'd get to the bottom, you almost run out of petrol in the main tank, and then the reserve tank would click in and you'd use the fuel in there. But the point was, you had to keep the reserve tank full up, because otherwise, if you ran out of petrol in the main tank, there'd be nothing there. And so when we go into our second wind, we are using up the reserve tank, which means it's no longer full, which we need it to be full for those situations where we become ill, or when there's a crisis or an emergency or something, and we need extra resource to deal with it. And recovering from simply being tired is relatively straightforward for our system, but recovering from having no reserve energy in our tank, as it were, is much, much more difficult. And in fact, almost impossible for many of us, because along with the habit of going into our second wind is the habit of resting just enough so that we can then function. And what that means is we're constantly running on relatively empty. And that's not good for us. That's bad for the system. It's stressful for the system. It creates a psychological fear, because on a subconscious level, we know we're putting ourselves in danger when we do that. So that's going into our second wind. So how that relates to the over-revving. The over-revving happens when We're trying to keep going on less and less energy. And like a lot of actual other physical systems other than the human body, when you're doing that, the system over revs in order to try to keep going at the same speed and at the same pace. And the over revving actually uses up the remnants of the energy even faster. And it reminds me, when I was a child, we'd be running around outside in the sunshine, playing and having fun. And the adults would say to each other, she's overtired. I remember adults saying this to each other about me. Oh, she's overtired. And I remember being there playing it. Well, how on earth can you think I'm tired, let alone overtired? Can't you see I'm running around having a wonderful time? But they were able to discern something that I wasn't aware of, which was that I was actually running on fumes, and that my behavior was becoming more, had a slightly frenzied edge to it. And you'll have seen this in children. You also see it in children who are keeping going because they're on a sugar high. So what they're doing is they're actually depleting their energies, but they feel energized. And so they keep going even more. And then they deplete themselves even more. So I would find myself sent indoors, lying down, resting, when I felt like I wanted to be outside. And it was really annoying. But actually, that's exactly the same as the over-revving that can occur now as an adult. So something that I've understood from all of this and learned from all of this is, just because we can go into our second wind doesn't mean we necessarily should do, because that's there as a fail-safe for emergencies. It's not there just to be used the whole time. It's a bit like having a deposit account in the bank. The purpose of the deposit account is not for us to dip into anytime we fancy going out for a drink or want to buy another outfit, something like that. It's there as a reserve for when we need a reserve. So over-revving and going into our second wind are to be watched out for. And if you have any of that kind of habit, how do you know you've got that habit, by the way, if you've never thought about it? Well, one way you know you've got that habit is because you never feel completely rested. When you wake up in the morning, you don't feel completely refreshed. And you find that things rub you up the wrong way or irritate you or upset you, perhaps more so than they ought to, because you're running on fumes. So these days, it's unusual to meet somebody who is completely well-rested, fully resourced, fully restored. And people who are like that stand out. They seem younger than they actually are in years. They seem calmer. They have more equanimity. They often seem wiser. They often seem more humorous. They seem to be having more fun. And often they make better choices because they're playing with a full deck. They've got the full energy that they need that's been given to them as part of their design. So I would like to wish you a restorative week. If you're able to find time and space to perhaps rest a little bit more, to perhaps give yourself the space to catch yourself before you start going into your second wind and over-revving, then I wish that for you. So have a really good week. In the meantime, please check out my other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And if you'd like to know about my expansive coaching and my freedom of spirit work, please drop into beingspace.world or freedomofspirit.world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.